In this week's video, we're going to discuss how to be successful hunting the whitetail rut.
Mossy Oak Properties, where outdoorsmen find their favorite place.
Well, it's the month of November, and for a whitetail deer hunter in most of the country, the region, we've been waiting for this day. It's like Christmas for most of us. It means one thing.
It's the rut.
It is the rut.
It's an exciting time of year.
Yes, it's a time of year where, again, most whitetail deer hunters, we wait impatiently for this time. All the practice, all the stuff that we buy at Walmart, Cabela's, and Bass Pro, all the trinkets, you know, the grunt tubes, the buck decoys, all that stuff that we drive our loved ones nuts in purchasing.
Yeah.
This is when we get to use it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's sweet November. It's the rut. This is a breeding season for the whitetail deer. And as a whitetail deer hunter, this is the most exciting time of year to hunt whitetails. In previous videos, we talked about how maybe October might be the best time of year, but this is the most exciting time.
Oh yeah.
Bucks are chasing does, there's rubs, there's scrapes. You see new deer popping up overnight. It's an exciting time of year, and in this video, we're going to discuss how to be successful hunting the whitetail rut, because as much fun as it is to observe and participate in, it can be difficult to hunt. And to get things started, it's the breeding season right now. Bucks are looking for does, so it stands to reason to find bucks this time of year during the rut. What would you do if bucks are looking for does? What would you try to find a buck?
Well, one would think find a does.
It sounds easy and simple, because it is. And if you find does this time of year, you're going to find bucks.
Yep.
Does are doing their thing. Not much changes. Biologically speaking, yeah, does are coming into estrus, and that's a separate video for another day. But right now, does are still kind of doing their thing. Bed to feed patterns. They're staying out of open fields because they're kind of tired of being harassed and chased around by bucks. But does are doing their thing. Bucks are looking for does. So if you can find does, eventually put in your time, you're going to find bucks. So focus on bedding areas, mainly in the morning, food sources in the afternoon. Where you normally find does, eventually bucks of all age classes, year and a half all the way up to the mature bucks that we're chasing, eventually they're going to show themselves in search of an estrus doe.
Yeah, and there's several cycles, if you will, of the rut. There's the pre-rut, and then there's like what we call lockdown rut, and then them coming off those does looking for some other does that are in estrus, you know, they didn't get bred the first cycle or whatever.
Right.
But pre-rut is one of my favorites. Usually like end of October, beginning of November, and you know, they're just on their feet. The does are not really receptive yet, and they're just on their feet. They're exposing themselves. They're coming into those food plots, like Cody said. Those does are, you know, going into food plots and they get harassed. But that's, you know, later on in the first week of November, if you will. And then there's the lockdown time, where when you're hunting, let's say a food plot or a food source, you start just seeing those fawns and button bucks in the year and a half. That means you got to pay your dues, pay your time in the stand, or you're blind. But the next favorite is when they come off that. It's like usually the second, third week, depend. A lot of the fetus studies that we do, those does are being bred. I know in Ohio, it's like from the 7th, 8th, 9th to the 12th, 15th, you know, they're getting bred. And then you get that time period where you check your trail cameras, your cell cams and stuff, you kind of start seeing that same pre-rut activity. They're really on their feet.
So yeah, that's step one, and it's a simple step, and it sounds easy, but find the does. Bucks are looking for does this time of year, so you should be too. And like I said, eventually you put enough time in and you hunt where you know does are spending time. Bucks this time of year in search of estrus does are eventually going to show themselves. And so transition into our next talking point. This also sounds easy, but in principle it's a little difficult. It's to put in as much time as you can. Because as you mentioned, there are several different phases of the rut. Pre-rut or seeking when bucks, that's generally your pre-rut when bucks are cruising. Scent checking, working scrapes, looking for that estrus doe. Chase phase, which is when bucks are going crazy. Lockdown, when bucks are locked down with does. So there are different phases to the rut. And as hunters, we don't know exactly when that's happening. We don't know when it's exactly seeking or when it's exactly chasing. So you got to put in your time, because it can go from dead quiet to hot as a firecracker in the snap of a finger.
Yeah, last year, I know I shot my buck at November 12th, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I just woke up from a nap in my blind. I just took a nice little siesta. Next thing you know, wake up, a half hour later, there he is, you know. But that's how quick it can happen. You gotta, sometimes, you know, you pack a lunch or whatever, all day sitting is definitely an option, for sure.
If you can stand it, sit all day. I mean, put as much time as you can. And a lot of times as deer hunters, we pay attention to weather and always pay attention to wind, but, you know, during the rut, peak of the rut, weather is secondary. It can be 75 degrees in the middle of the day, and if there's a hot doe out in the middle of the field, then their bucks are going to work to find her. They pay no attention to the temperature, to the time of day, to any of those variables or factors. Number one thing on a buck's mind this time of year is to find a doe and to breed her. And again, the more time you can put in the stand, the better opportunity you're going to give yourself to find that buck looking for that doe.
Yeah, and on top of the next thing, on top of sitting, don't be afraid to utilize those things that we buy that we were talking about, you know, a grunt tube, even a good set of rattling horns, you know. Bigger doesn't always mean the better, you know, and busted knuckles and everything. I cut those brow tines off, recommendation and stuff. But yeah, just using those, going on YouTube and, you know, going listening to the real guys. I mean, in the sense of the professional deer hunters, you know, the Bill Winkies and stuff like that. Those guys know what, you know, listen to them when it comes to rattling and grunting and stuff. But don't be afraid. Don't go nuts when you see a buck. Don't go out there and just start blowing the tube as loud as you can. You know, you'll definitely spook it. But don't be afraid. Snort wheeze at a buck if he's starting to walk away. And I'm not going to imitate it, but it's not that great. But no, just don't be afraid, but don't go crazy.
Yeah, this time of year, especially for bucks, it gives you the opportunity to be proactive and aggressive. You know, October, grunting and rattling at a buck, he's probably not going to respond to it. Later in the season, probably not going to respond to it. But this time of year are when bucks are most vulnerable. And they are susceptible to calling, decoys, scents, all the tactics like you mentioned, all the tricks of the trade. They are useful when used correctly. They're not foolproof, so don't think just because you've hit the tube or you've rattled the antlers like they're going to come running. It does take some methodology and some intentionality behind it, but this is the time of year to do that for sure. And to transition, so we've talked about find does, find the bucks, put in your time. We've talked about the different strategies or tactics you can use. We haven't talked about where to actually put yourself in the stand and your blinds to capitalize on the rut this time of year and to see bucks. And for me, where I like to spend time, it's, you know, early season you're focused on food, late season you're focused on food. This time of year, I'm focusing on bedding areas in the morning because bucks will scent check those bedding areas looking for does in the morning. But more than anything, travel corridors, funnels, pinch points, trails between bed and food, because bucks are covering ground. They're not going to, if they're out in a food plot, they're not out there for long. They're more than likely going to scent check it downwind, or they're going to pop their head out, see if there's a doe in the food plot or the food source, and then get back to looking. They're covering ground right now, putting miles on the ground. So put yourself in position where you can intercept those bucks traveling from point A to point B.
To add to that, there's one thing that, you know, it's one of those things where you shouldn't hunt it, but you can, and that is when you know rut is really kicking in. Not lockdown, but that pre-rut or that secondary rut. Don't be afraid to hunt a food plot, especially if you have a buck decoy or something like that. Don't be afraid to play and have, you know, in that sense. But, you know, again, it's one of those things where it is a little bit of trial and error, using your cameras and stuff to identify the hotter areas or whatever. So
and that's a good point. I mean, you mentioned the buck you shot last year. You shot at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's a testament to putting the time in. The buck that I shot last year, I shot in the afternoon on a food source. He wasn't there for the food. He was cruising through the food plot looking for does. So again, you know, food sources in the afternoon, normally that would be a place where you would find does. That's why I shot the buck that I did.
And the same thing with me. They were coming off those the first round of does and estrus, and those does were feeding in the food plot, and that's where he was. You know, he went in there, he was scent checking, he was bothering, he was a bowling ball. Is what he was doing. And so don't be afraid to hunt your food plots, but like Cody said, those corridors and, you know, they'll just be scent checking.
Yeah, and this is also an opportunity to be, we talked about being aggressive with calls. This is an opportunity to be aggressive and to really push deep into your timber and to hunt in bedding areas, because bucks are cruising, they're vulnerable. This is an opportunity for you to really push the envelope, and what you wouldn't do there in the early season or the late season, if you want to get aggressive and kind of, throw caution to the wind and throw a Hail Mary, this is the time of year to do it.
Yeah.
So all that to say, as a deer hunter, when you're hunting the rut, it seems like it's chaos, and it kind of is. Like there's bucks chasing does back and forth, does are running around. It's the most exciting time of year to hunt as a deer hunter, but as chaotic as it might seem, there is a rhyme or a reason to it. There is a lot of science behind it. We talked about the different phases of the rut, the pre-rut, rut, lockdown, breeding. So as chaotic as it might seem, you can still be intentional and really strategic in how you go about hunting the rut. And hopefully some of the tips and tactics, strategies, more thoughts than anything else that we want you to consider from this video that can help you be more successful this time of year hunting the whitetail rut.
Mossy Oak Properties, where outdoorsmen find their favorite place.